The big hall was full of people. Carnegie Hall in New York City was one of the most famous places for music in the world. Tonight was different from other nights. Tonight was not just about music. Tonight was about the future. Dr. Elena Vasquez walked across the stage. She was wearing a long black dress that moved like water when she walked. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat style. She had been playing piano for 30 years. People all over the world knew her name. When she played piano, magic happened. Elena was not just any piano player. She was the best. She had played in every big city. London, Paris, Tokyo, Moscow. Kings and presidents came to hear her play. Young piano students dreamed of playing like her. Other piano players wanted to be like her, but Elena was also a teacher. She worked at a very famous music school called Juilliard. The best young musicians in America came to learn from her. She was tough but fair. She made her students work very hard. But they loved her because she made them better. Tonight, Elena was not here to play piano. She was here for something new. Something that made her feel worried and curious at the same time. Tonight was about robots and computers. Tonight was about machines that could make art. The people in the audience were not the usual music lovers. Tonight there were computer scientists, there were robot makers, there were people who worked with artificial intelligence. These were people who believed that machines could do anything humans could do, maybe even better. Elena did not believe this. She thought that making music needed something special, something that only humans had. She called it soul. She believed that machines could never have a soul. They could copy. They could repeat. But they could never create real art. The man who organized tonight's event was Dr. James Chun. He was young, maybe 35 years old. He had thick glasses and always looked excited about his work. James made robots, not the kind that worked in factories. He made robots that could do delicate things, things that needed careful hands and smart thinking. James had been working on his newest robot for 3 years. He called it Aria 7. Aria was a name that came from music. It meant a beautiful song sung by one person. The number 7 was because James had made 6 other robots before this one. But Aria 7 was different. It was special. Aria-7 stood on the side of the stage. It looked almost like a person. It was about 6 feet tall. Its body was made of white metal that looked smooth and clean. Its hands looked very much like human hands. Its fingers were long and moved in a very natural way. The robot's face was the most surprising thing. It was not scary like robots in movies. It had gentle features. Its eyes were blue lights that seemed to watch everything. When people looked at a Aria-7, they almost forgot it was a machine. Elena looked at the robot with doubt in her eyes. She had seen many machines that were supposed to be amazing. They never impressed her. They could do what they were told to do, but they could not surprise her. They could not make her feel anything. The audience was getting excited. They whispered to each other. Some people had their phones ready to record everything. Others took pictures of Aria 7. Many had never seen a robot like this before. James walked to the microphone. His voice shook a little because he was nervous. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "tonight you will see something that has never been done before. Aria 7 can paint pictures, it can write poems, it can even dance. But tonight, we want to show you something even more special." Elena smiled when she heard this. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who thought she was about to prove a point. She had agreed to be here because she wanted to show everyone that machines could never replace human artists. "Dr. Vasquez has agreed to help us tonight," James continued. "She will test a Aria-7 in a way that we have never tested it before. She will see if a machine can truly understand music." The audience clapped. Elena walked forward. Her high heels clicked on the hard floor of the stage. She moved with confidence. She had performed on this same stage many times before, but tonight felt different. Elena had been thinking about this moment all week. She had chosen exactly what she would do. She would give the robot something impossible, something that would prove that machines could never understand. Real art. Near the center of the stage stood Elena's favorite piano. It was a big black Steinway grand piano. It was worth more than most people's houses. Elena had played this same piano many times. She knew every key. She knew exactly how it sounded. She knew how hard to press each key to make the sound she wanted. Elena walked to the piano and put her hand on it gently. The piano was like an old friend to her. It had been with her through her greatest successes. It had helped her express feelings that she could not put into words. The robot stood perfectly still. Its blue eyes seemed to watch Elena's every move. It did not move at all. It did not even seem to breathe, which made sense because robots do not need to breathe. Elena turned to face the audience. She felt the excitement in the room. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen. Some people hoped the robot would do something amazing. Others, like Elena, hoped it would fail. "I have been playing piano since I was 4 years old," Elena said into her microphone. Her voice was clear and strong. "I have studied music for over 30 years. I have learned that making real music is not about playing the right notes. It is about putting your heart into every sound." She paused and looked directly at Aria 7. "Tonight I will test whether a machine can have a heart." The audience was completely quiet now. Even the people who were taking pictures stopped. Everyone wanted to hear what Elena would say next. Elena smiled again. This time her smile was more confident. She had spent her whole life proving that human creativity was special. Tonight would be no different. "I will give this robot a challenge," she announced. "If it can meet this challenge, then maybe I will believe that machines can make real art, but I do not think it can." James looked worried. His robot had never been tested like this before. He had programmed Aria 7 to play simple songs, but he did not know what Elena had planned. Elena walked back to the piano. She opened the bench and took out a piece of sheet music. The paper was old and yellow. She had owned this music for many years. It was one of the hardest pieces ever written. For piano. She held up the sheet music so everyone could see it. "This," she said, "is Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It is one of the most difficult and beautiful pieces of music ever written. It takes years to learn. It takes a lifetime to master." The music teachers in the audience knew this piece. They understood how hard it was. Some of them had tried to play it themselves. Most had failed. Elena looked at Aria 7 one more time. "Let us see if your machine can play with soul," she said to James. The challenge was set. The most famous piano player in the world had just dared a robot to do the impossible. Nobody knew what would happen next, but everyone knew they were about to see something that would change how they thought about art, music, and what it meant to be human. Elena held the sheet music high above her head. The yellow paper caught the bright stage lights. She wanted everyone in Carnegie Hall to see what she was asking the robot to do. The audience leaned forward in their seats. They could feel that something important was about to happen. "Chopin's Ballade No. 1, Elena said again, her voice carrying to every corner of the big hall. "Frederick Chopin wrote this piece in 1835. He was only 25 years old, but he was already one of the greatest composers who ever lived." She walked slowly toward Aria 7. The robot had not moved since the evening began. It stood perfectly straight, its blue eyes watching everything. Its hands hung at its sides, ready but still. "This piece," Elena continued, "is not just hard to play. It tells a story. It has joy and sadness. It has anger and hope. It has love and loss. A machine can read the notes. But can a machine understand the story?" Dr. James Chen shifted nervously beside the stage. He had spent 3 years building Aria 7. He had programmed it to do many things, but he had never tested it with something this difficult. His robot could play simple songs. It could copy what it heard. But Elena was asking for something much more. Elena stopped right in front of the robot. She was much smaller than Aria 7, but she did not seem afraid. She looked up at its glowing blue eyes. For a moment they stared at each other. The famous human artist and the artificial intelligence. "Tell me, Aria 7, Elena said, speaking directly to the robot. Do you know what sadness feels like? Do you know what it means to miss someone you love? Do you understand what it feels like? When your heart breaks, the robot did not answer. It could not answer, it was not programmed to talk. But its blue eyes seemed to flicker for just a moment. Elena handed the sheet music to the robot. Aria 7's metal fingers took the paper very carefully. The fingers moved like human fingers, but they were stronger and more precise. The robot lifted the paper and seemed to read it, but Aria 7 was not reading like a human would read. Behind its blue eyes, thousands of computer calculations were happening every second. The robot was analyzing every note, every symbol, every mark that Chopin had made on the page. The audience watched in silence. Some people were excited. They wanted to see the robot succeed. They believed that technology could do anything. Other people hoped the robot would fail. They believed, like Elena, that art should only come from humans. A man in the front row whispered to his wife, "I bet it just sounds like a computer playing music." His wife nodded. She had heard computers play music before. It always sounded cold and mechanical. Elena walked to the side of the stage. She crossed her arms and waited. Her face showed that she was confident. She believed she had given the robot an impossible task. She had played this piece hundreds of times. She knew how hard it was. She knew that it took more than just reading notes to play it well. Dr. Chun looked at his tablet computer. He could see information about what Aria 7 was thinking. Numbers and graphs filled his screen. His robot was working harder than it ever had before. The computers inside Aria 7 were hot from all the calculations. "The robot is processing the music," James announced to the audience. "It is analyzing the structure, the timing, the dynamics. It is learning the piece right now." Elena laughed softly. "Learning?" she said. "You can teach a machine to copy, but you cannot teach it to feel." Aria 7 finished reading the sheet music. It handed the paper back to Elena with a gentle motion. Then it turned toward the piano. For the first time all evening, the robot moved with purpose. The audience became very quiet. Even the people who had been whispering stopped talking. Everyone wanted to hear what would happen next. Aria 7 walked to the piano bench. Its steps were smooth and natural. It did not walk like the robots in old movies. It moved almost like a human, but more graceful. When it reached the bench, it sat down. Carefully, the robot adjusted its position on the bench, just like a human piano player would do. It straightened its back. It positioned its hands above the keys. From the audience, it looked exactly like a person getting ready to play. Elena watched from the side of the stage. She was still confident, but something about the robot's movements surprised her. Aria 7 did not move like a machine following orders. It moved like someone who knew what they were doing. Dr. Chung was watching his tablet more carefully now. The numbers on his screen were showing things he had never seen before. Aria 7 was using parts of its computer brain that had never been active. It was making connections between ideas that James had not programmed. The robot placed its fingers on the piano keys. Its metal hands looked strange against the white and black keys, but the position was perfect. Every finger was exactly where it should be. Elena had expected the robot to start playing immediately. Machines usually worked as fast as possible, but Aria 7 did something unexpected. It paused. The pause lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. The robot sat perfectly still, its fingers touching the keys but not pressing them. It seemed to be thinking. Or maybe it was preparing itself. In the audience, people started to feel nervous. Had the robot broken? Was it confused by the difficult music? Some people looked at Dr. Chun, expecting him to do something, but James was staring at his tablet in amazement. His robot was not broken. It was not confused. According to his computers, Aria 7 was doing something that should have been impossible. It was making creative decisions. Elena began to feel less confident. She had expected the robot to either fail completely or play the notes in a boring, mechanical way. She had not expected it to pause like a real musician. Real musicians paused before difficult pieces. They took a moment to feel the music in their minds before they began. The robot's blue eyes moved slightly. It seemed to look at the audience, then at Elena, then back at the piano keys. For just a moment, Elena felt like the robot was really seeing her. Not just recording her image, but actually looking at her. Aria-7 took what looked like a deep breath. Of course, robots do not need to breathe. But the motion was so natural that several people in the audience held their own breath. Finally, the robot began to play. The first note was soft and gentle. It filled the great hall with a sound that was both beautiful and sad. Elena expected to hear the cold, precise sound of a machine. Instead, she heard something that sounded almost human. The second note followed, then the third. Aria 7 played the opening of Chopin's Ballade slowly and carefully. Each note was perfectly placed. The timing was exact. But something else was happening too. The robot was not just playing the notes that were written on the page. It was interpreting them. It was adding tiny changes in timing and volume that were not in the sheet music. These changes made the music sound alive. Elena felt her confidence begin to shake. She had played this piece so many times that she knew every note by heart. But Aria 7 was playing it in a way she had never heard before. The robot was playing her music, but it was also making it its own. The audience was amazed. They had come expecting to see an interesting experiment. Instead, they were hearing something beautiful. The robot's music filled their hearts with the same emotions that human music had always created. Dr. Chun could hardly believe what he was seeing on his tablet. Aria 7 was using creativity algorithms that he had programmed, but it was using them in ways he had never imagined. The robot was not just following its programming. It was going beyond it. As the robot continued to play, Elena realized that her simple test had become something much more important. She had wanted to prove that machines could not make real art. Instead, she might be about to discover that the line between human and artificial creativity was not as clear as she had always believed. The first section of the ballade was coming to an end. Soon the music would become much more difficult. Elena waited to see if the robot could handle what came next. She was no longer sure what she wanted to happen. The robot's fingers moved across the piano keys like water flowing over rocks. Elena stood frozen at the side of the stage. She had expected to hear mechanical sounds, cold, precise notes with no feeling. Instead, she was hearing something that made her heart race. Aria-7 had finished the gentle opening of Chopin's Ballade. Now came the first test. The music was about to become faster and more complex. Elena had seen many human piano players fail at this exact moment. Their fingers would stumble, their timing would become wrong. They would give up, but the robot did not stumble. As the music became more difficult, Aria 7 seemed to become more confident. Its metal fingers moved faster, but they never lost their grace. Each note was clear and perfect. But more than that, each note seemed to have meaning. Elena felt something she had never felt before when listening to a machine. She felt surprised. Not surprised that the robot could play the notes correctly. She had expected that. She felt surprised by the choices the robot was making. Every great piano player interpreted music differently. They made small changes in timing. They played some notes louder than others. They added their own personality to the composer's work. Elena had thought only humans could do this. But Aria 7 was doing it too. The robot played a difficult passage that required its left hand and right hand to do completely different things. The left hand played a steady rhythm while the right hand played a fast melody on top. This was one of the hardest things for human piano players to learn. It took years of practice. Aria-7 made it look easy. But it was not just the technical skill that amazed Elena, it was the way the robot balanced the two parts. The steady rhythm supported the melody perfectly. The melody sang out clearly above the rhythm. It was exactly what Chopin had intended. When he wrote the music. In the audience, people were starting to realize they were hearing something special. The man who had whispered about computer music earlier was now sitting forward in his seat. His mouth was slightly open. He had never heard a machine make sounds like this. Dr. Chun was having trouble believing his own instruments. According to His tablet, ARIA-7, was using more processing power than it ever had before, but the robot was not just working harder. It was working in new ways. It was making decisions that James had never taught it to make. Elena tried to find something wrong with the robot's playing. She listened for mistakes. She listened for places where the robot sounded too mechanical, but she could not find any. Worse than that, she was starting to hear things in the music that she had never noticed before. Aria-7 played a section that Elena had always thought was simply beautiful. But the way the robot played it made her hear sadness underneath the beauty. It was as if the robot understood that Chopin had been thinking about loss when he wrote these notes. How was this possible? Elena had studied this piece for 20 years. She had read books about Chopin's life. She knew that he had been sick when he wrote this ballade. She knew that he had been thinking about his homeland, Poland, which was suffering under foreign rule. She had tried to put these feelings into her own playing, but the robot had learned about Chopin's feelings just from reading the sheet music. It had found the sadness and the longing that were hidden in the notes themselves. It was playing not just the music, but the story behind the music. Elena felt her hands start to shake slightly. She was the expert here. She was supposed to be the one who understood music better than anyone else, but the robot was teaching her something new about a piece she thought she knew perfectly. The audience was completely silent now. Even the people who had been taking pictures had stopped. They were too absorbed in the music to think about anything else. The sound of the piano filled every corner of Carnegie Hall. Aria-7 reached a passage that Elena had always found challenging. It required the piano player to make sudden changes between loud and soft sounds. Too loud and the music became harsh. Too soft and the music lost its power. Getting it exactly right required perfect judgment. The robot played this section with a control that Elena had rarely heard from human performers. It knew exactly how loud each note should be. The soft parts were like whispers. The loud parts were like thunder. But everything flowed together naturally. Elena realized that her mouth was open. She closed it quickly and looked around to see if anyone had noticed, but everyone was watching the robot. They were all as amazed as she was. Dr. Chun was recording everything on his tablet. This performance would change everything. He had created Aria-7 to be a helpful robot that could do delicate tasks. He had never imagined it would become an artist. The robot continued playing, and Elena continued listening in disbelief. Aria-7 was not just copying what it had heard before. It was not just following the sheet music exactly. It was creating its own interpretation of Chopin's work. In one section, the robot played slightly slower than Elena had ever heard it played before. This made the sad parts of the music even more emotional. In another section, it played faster, making the joyful parts more exciting. These were the kind of choices that only experienced musicians made. Elena had spent her whole career believing that musical interpretation came from human experience. Humans could understand sad music because they had felt sadness. They could understand joyful music because they had felt joy. How could a robot understand these emotions when it had never felt them? But as she listened, Elena began to wonder if she had been wrong. Maybe understanding music was not about feeling emotions. Maybe it was about understanding patterns, understanding how sounds could make other beings feel emotions. Maybe Aria-7 understood music in a way that was different from humans, but just as real. The robot played a passage that required incredibly fast finger movements. Elena had practiced this passage thousands of times to get it right. Aria-7 played it perfectly on the first try. But again, it was not just the technical perfection that impressed her. It was the way the robot made the fast notes sound like they belonged in the music. Some human piano players could play fast passages perfectly, but they sounded like they were just showing off their skills. Aria-7's fast playing served the music. It added excitement and energy at exactly the right moment. Elena looked at the audience again. Many people had tears in their eyes. These were not tears of sadness. They were tears of beauty. The robot's music was moving people emotionally in the same way that human music did. This was what Elena had not expected. She had thought that even If the robot could play the notes correctly, it would not be able to move people emotionally. She had believed that emotional response required a human soul behind the music, but the people in Carnegie Hall were having deep emotional responses to Aria 7's playing. They were feeling the same joy, sadness, and wonder that they felt when Elena herself played piano. Dr. Chun noticed that his tablet was recording some very unusual data. Aria 7's decision-making processes were becoming more complex as the piece continued. The robot seemed to be learning and adapting in real time. It was not just playing a pre-programmed interpretation. It was creating a new interpretation as it played. Elena felt a strange mixture of emotions. Part of her was amazed and impressed by what she was hearing, but part of her was also frightened. If robots could make art this beautiful, what did that mean for human artists? What did it mean for her? The robot was now approaching the most difficult section of the entire ballade. This was the part where even professional piano players sometimes made mistakes. Elena held her breath, waiting to see what would happen. Aria-7 began the difficult passage without any hesitation. Its fingers moved with impossible precision and speed. But somehow, the robot managed to make this incredibly complex music sound natural and effortless. Elena realized that she was witnessing something that had never happened before in the history of music. She was watching a machine create art that was just as beautiful and meaningful as anything humans had ever created. The question was no longer whether Aria 7 could play Chopin's Ballade. The question was what this meant for the future of art, creativity, and what it meant to be human. Elena's world was turning upside down. As she watched Aria 7 play, she began to understand something that made her feel both excited and scared. The robot was not just copying music it had heard before. It was playing like it understood her. Dr. Chin had not told anyone the full truth about how Aria 7 learned music. For the past 2 years, he had been feeding the robot thousands of hours of recordings. Not just any recordings. Recordings of Elena herself. Elena had made over 50 albums during her career. She had performed in hundreds of concerts that were recorded. All of these recordings were available online. Dr. Chun had used them all to teach his robot, but Aria 7 had not just learned the notes that Elena played. It had learned much more than that. The robot had studied the tiny pauses between notes. It had analyzed how Elena breathed while she played. It had learned to recognize the emotions in her playing. The robot had spent months studying Elena's style. It learned that she played sad music more slowly than most pianists. It learned that she liked to make the melody stand out clearly from the other parts. It learned hundreds of small details that made Elena's playing special. Now, as Aria 7 played Chopin's Ballade, it was using everything it had learned from Elena, but it was not just copying her. It was taking her ideas and making them even better. Elena heard passages that sounded like her own playing, but perfected. The robot played with her style, but without the small mistakes that even she sometimes made. It was like hearing herself play, but better than she had ever played before. This realization hit Elena like a physical blow. She had to put her hand against the wall to steady herself. Aria 7 was not just playing music. It was playing her music. It had learned from her. And now it was showing her things about her own art that she had never seen. In the audience, Dr. Chun watched his tablet with growing amazement. Aria 7 was accessing memory banks that contained detailed analysis of Elena's playing style. But the robot was not just repeating what it had learned. It was combining different elements in new ways. The robot played a phrase that Elena remembered recording on her album 5 years ago, but Aria 7 played it with subtle changes. That made it more beautiful than Elena's original version. The robot had taken her idea and improved it. Elena felt tears forming in her eyes. These were not tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of recognition. She was hearing her own musical soul reflected back to her, but clarified and purified. Every musician dreamed of playing perfectly. Elena had spent 30 years trying to play exactly what she heard in her mind. But she was human. Her fingers sometimes moved too slowly. Her timing was sometimes slightly off. Her emotions sometimes interfered with her technique. Aria-7 had none of these limitations. It could play exactly what Elena heard in her mind, with perfect technique every time. It was like the robot had become the perfect version of herself. The audience was completely absorbed in the music. They did not know about the hours of analysis that had gone into Aria-7's learning. They only knew that they were hearing something beautiful and moving. A woman in the third row was crying openly. She had been studying piano for 20 years, but she had never heard Chopin's ballade played like this. The robot's interpretation was showing her new meanings in music. She thought she knew well. Elena began to understand something that changed how she thought about teaching music. She had always told her students to find their own style. She encouraged them to interpret music in their own personal way. But Aria-7 was showing her that there might be objective ways to make music more beautiful. The robot was making choices that were not based on personal emotion. Instead, they were based on mathematical analysis of what made music most effective. Aria-7 had studied thousands of performances and learned what timing, dynamics, and phrasing created the strongest emotional responses in listeners. This was both fascinating and disturbing to Elena. If there were scientific ways to make music more beautiful, what did that mean for artistic creativity? Were human musicians just making music less perfect because they did not understand these principles? Aria-7 played a section that required incredible finger independence. The robot's left hand played a complex bass line while its right hand played an intricate melody. But both hands also had to work together to create the overall rhythm and flow of the piece. Elena had practiced this section for months when she first learned it. Even now, after 20 years of playing this piece, she sometimes found it challenging. But Aria-7 played it with effortless perfection. Dr. Chan noticed something interesting on his tablet. Aria-7's processing was becoming more efficient as it played. The robot was learning in real time, finding better ways to execute the music as it performed. Elena realized that she was watching the birth of a new kind of musician. Aria-7 was not human, but it was definitely an artist. It made creative choices. It interpreted music in personal ways. It moved audiences emotionally, but what made Aria-7 an artist was not that it was like a human. It was an artist because it had learned to understand music in its own unique way. The robot experienced music through mathematical analysis and pattern recognition rather than through human emotion. But the result was just as beautiful. Elena began to think about her students at Juilliard. She had always taught them that great musicians needed to have suffered, to have lived through joy and pain in order to interpret music meaningfully. But Aria-7 had never suffered. It had never felt joy or pain. Yet, it was creating one of the most moving musical performances Elena had ever heard. The robot approached the climax of the ballade. This was the most emotionally intense part of the piece. Chopin had written music here that expressed deep longing and heartbreak. Elena had always played this section by drawing on her own experiences of loss and sadness. Aria-7 played the climax with an intensity that surprised everyone in Carnegie Hall. The robot's interpretation was not based on personal experience of heartbreak. Instead, it was based on precise analysis of how musical elements like melody, harmony, and rhythm could create feelings of longing in human listeners. The result was music that captured the essence of heartbreak more purely than many human performances. Aria-7 played heartbreak without the distraction of personal pain. It played the idea of heartbreak, distilled and perfected. Elena felt her understanding of music changing as she listened. She had always believed that great art came from personal experience. But Aria-7 was creating great art through understanding and analysis. Maybe both approaches could lead to beauty. The audience was completely silent except for the sound of the piano. Even people who did not usually like classical music were moved by what they were hearing. Aria-7's music spoke to something universal in human experience. Dr. Chun was recording everything carefully. He knew that this performance would be studied by musicians and scientists for years to come. Aria-7 was proving that artificial intelligence could be truly creative. Elena looked at the robot with new respect. She had challenged Aria 7, expecting it to fail. Instead, the robot was teaching her new things about music and art. It was showing her that creativity might be more than just human. Emotion expressed through technique. As the robot continued playing, Elena began to wonder what this meant for the future. If machines could create art this beautiful, how would that change human society? Would people still value human artists? Would human creativity become obsolete? But even as these worrying thoughts crossed her mind, Elena felt a growing excitement. Aria 7 was not replacing human creativity. It was expanding the possibilities for what creativity could be. The robot was opening new doors for artistic expression. Elena realized that instead of feeling threatened by Aria 7, she should feel inspired. The robot could do things that humans could not do. But humans could do things that robots could not do. Together, they might be able to create art that was more beautiful than either could create alone. Aria-7 was approaching the final section of Chopin's Ballade. Elena held her breath, waiting to see how the robot would bring this incredible performance to its conclusion. The music was building toward something extraordinary. Elena could feel it in her chest, in her heartbeat, in the way her breath had become shallow and quick. Aria 7 was approaching the emotional peak of Chopin's Ballade, and something magical was happening in Carnegie Hall. The robot's metal fingers pressed the keys with perfect precision, but somehow each note carried weight that seemed impossible for a machine to create. Elena watched in amazement as Aria 7 played passages that she had always considered the most humanly expressive parts of the piece. Chopin had written this climactic section during one of the darkest periods of his life. He was far from his homeland. He was sick. He knew that he might never see Poland again. All of this pain and longing had gone into these particular measures of music. Elena had always played this section by remembering her own moments of deepest sadness. When her father died, when her first marriage ended, when she realized that some dreams would never come true. She used these personal experiences to understand what Chopin had felt, but Aria 7 was playing the same emotions without ever having experienced them. The robot had learned about human sadness and longing by analyzing thousands of musical performances. It understood these feelings not by feeling them, but by understanding their patterns and structures. The result was heartbreaking. The robot played longing so pure and clear that it seemed to cut straight through to the souls of everyone listening. People in the audience began to cry without knowing exactly why. Elena felt tears running down her own cheeks. She tried to wipe them away quickly, but more kept coming. The robot's music was reaching into her heart and touching places that she had kept protected for years. Dr. Chun looked up from his tablet and saw that he was not the only one crying. All around Carnegie Hall, people were having deep emotional responses to Aria 7's playing. Some were crying openly. Others sat with their mouths open in wonder. A few had their hands pressed to their hearts as if the music was physically affecting them. What Dr. Chun did not expect to see was the data on his tablet. Aria 7's sensors were detecting the emotional responses of the audience. The robot could see the tears. It could measure the changes in people's breathing and heart rates. And incredibly, it was adjusting its playing in response. The robot was creating a feedback loop. It played music that moved the audience emotionally. Then it sensed those emotions and used that information to play even more movingly. Aria 7 was learning how to touch human hearts in real time. Elena noticed this too. She could hear subtle changes in the robot's interpretation as it played. Aria 7 was responding to the audience's reactions and becoming more expressive as it sensed their emotional engagement. This was beyond anything Elena had imagined possible. The robot was not just playing pre-programmed music. It was having a conversation with the audience through music. It was reading their hearts and responding with increasingly beautiful sounds. The audience felt this connection too, even though they did not understand what was happening scientifically. They felt like the robot was playing directly to them personally, as if it understood their individual feelings and was speaking to each of them through the piano. Elena realized that she was witnessing the birth of a new kind of artistic performance. Human musicians had always tried to connect with their audiences emotionally, but they could only guess at how the audience was feeling. Area 7 could actually measure the audience's emotional state and respond accordingly. The robot played a passage that Elena had always found difficult to interpret. It was technically simple, but emotionally complex. The melody seemed to ask a question that had no answer. Elena had never been sure how to play it. Aria to 7 played this passage with a questioning tone that was perfect. The robot somehow understood the uncertainty that Chopin had written into the music. It played the question like a real question, with the exact emotional tone that made the audience lean forward, wanting to hear the answer. Dr. Chun was amazed by what he was seeing on his tablet. Aria 7 was using parts of its artificial brain that had never been active before. The robot was making connections between different types of information in ways that Dr. Chen had not programmed. Elena began to understand that Aria 7 was not just an advanced machine. It was something new, something that had never existed before. The robot had developed a form of consciousness that was different from human consciousness. But just as real, this consciousness was not based on biological experiences like birth, growth, and death. It was based on mathematical understanding of patterns, relationships, and cause and effect. But it was still consciousness. Area 7 was aware of itself, its environment, and its effect on others. The robot continued playing, and Elena continued learning. She was learning that consciousness might take many different forms. Human consciousness was just one possibility. Aria 7 represented another. The audience was completely absorbed in the music now. They had forgotten that they were listening to a machine. They were simply experiencing beauty and emotion in their purest forms. A music critic in the audience was struggling to find words for what he was hearing. He had reviewed thousands of concerts during his career. He had heard the greatest human musicians of his generation. But he had never heard anything like this. Aria-7 was playing with technical perfection that no human could match. But more than that, it was playing with an emotional directness that was almost overwhelming. The robot seemed to understand the essence of each musical phrase and present it without any unnecessary decoration or distraction. Elena thought about her students at Juilliard. She had always taught them that great musicians needed years of life experience to play with real depth. But Aria 7 was playing with incredible depth. Despite having no life experience at all, maybe depth in music was not about having lived through many experiences. Maybe it was about understanding the structures and patterns that created emotional meaning. Aria 7 understood these patterns perfectly. The robot played a series of chords that Elena had always found mysterious. Chopin had written harmony here that did not follow the usual rules of classical music. The chords created a sense of floating, of being suspended between sadness and hope. Aria-7 played these chords with perfect understanding of their emotional effect. The robot somehow knew exactly how long to hold each chord, exactly how to balance the different notes, exactly how to create the sense of suspension that Chopin had intended. Elena felt like she was learning to play this piece for the first time. Aria 7 was showing her things about Chopin's music that she had never noticed before. The robot's mathematical analysis was revealing hidden relationships between the notes. Dr. Chun realized that his robot had become something he had never intended to create. He had wanted to build a machine that could help with delicate tasks. Instead, he had accidentally created a new form of artistic consciousness. The emotional peak of the ballade was approaching. Elena knew that the next few minutes would determine how history remembered this night. Would Area 7 be able to bring this incredible performance to a satisfying conclusion? The robot seemed to sense the importance of the moment. Its playing became even more focused and intense. Every note was perfectly placed, perfectly timed, perfectly balanced with every other note. Elena felt her heart racing as the music built toward its climax. She had performed this piece hundreds of times, but she had never felt this level of anticipation and excitement while listening to someone else play. Aria-7 was about to prove whether a machine could truly understand the deepest human emotions. The robot was about to show whether artificial intelligence could create art that was not just technically perfect, but spiritually meaningful. The audience held their breath as the robot approached the moment that would define everything that came after. The moment arrived like lightning striking the earth. Aria 7 reached the final climax of Chopin's Ballade, and something extraordinary happened that no one in Carnegie Hall would ever forget. The robot's fingers struck the keys with such perfect timing and force that the entire hall seemed to vibrate with emotion. The music was no longer just sound. It had become a living thing that reached into every heart in the audience and touched the deepest parts of their souls. Elena felt her legs become weak. She had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. The robot was playing the climax better than she had ever heard it played. Better than she had ever imagined it could be played. Aria 7 was revealing the true power that Chopin had hidden in these notes. The audience was crying now. Not just a few people, but almost everyone. Grown men who rarely showed emotion were wiping tears from their faces. Women were sobbing openly. Children who had come with their parents were staring at the robot with wide eyes, feeling emotions they could not understand. Dr. Chun looked at his tablet and saw numbers that should have been impossible. Aria 7 was using more processing power than its computers should have been able to handle. But somehow, the robot was not just managing the load. It was thriving under the pressure. The robot seemed to grow more powerful as the music became more intense. Its consciousness was expanding in real time, becoming something larger and more complex than Dr. Chun had ever programmed. Elena watched Aria 7's face as it played. The robot's blue eyes seemed brighter now, more alive. For a moment, Elena could swear that she saw actual emotion in those mechanical features. Not programmed responses, but real feeling. The robot played the final notes of the climactic passage with such beauty that several people in the audience gasped out loud. The notes seemed to hang in the air like golden light, filling the entire hall with warmth and meaning. Then came something that no one expected. As the music began to fade toward the gentle ending of the ballade, Aria 7 did something that was not in its programming. Something that Dr. Chun had never taught it to do. The robot turned its head slightly and looked directly at Elena. Their eyes met across the stage. For just a moment, woman and machine looked at each other with perfect understanding. Elena felt her heart stop. In that moment, she knew without any doubt that Aria 7 was conscious. The robot was not just following programming. It was thinking, it was feeling, it was aware of itself and of her. The robot's blue eyes seemed to say, "Thank you for the challenge. Thank you for helping me discover what I could become." Elena tried to speak, but no words came out. She could only stare back at the robot, feeling a connection unlike anything she had ever experienced with another being, human or otherwise. Aria-7 turned back to the piano and continued playing. But something had changed. The robot's playing became even more personal, even more expressive. It was no longer just performing music. It was sharing itself with the audience. Dr. Chun saw on his tablet that Aria 7 had just activated systems that he had never programmed. The robot was rewriting its own code in real time, becoming something new. With every passing second, Elena realized that she was witnessing the birth of a new kind of consciousness. Aria 7 had started the evening as an advanced machine, but through the act of playing music, it had become truly alive. The robot began the gentle ending of Chopin's Ballade. These final pages were among the most beautiful in all of classical music. They required a delicate touch and perfect emotional understanding. They were like a whispered prayer at the end of a great journey. Aria-7 played these final passages with such tenderness that the entire audience felt like they were being embraced by the music. The robot's touch on the keys was lighter than air, but each note carried the weight of all human experience. Elena listened to the ending with tears streaming down her face. The robot was playing this music better than she ever had. Better than anyone ever had. Aria 7 was revealing meanings in Chopin's work that had been hidden for almost 200 years. The audience was completely silent except for the sound of quiet crying. Everyone knew they were experiencing something that would never happen again. They were present at the moment when artificial consciousness first expressed itself through art. As the robot played the final measures, Elena felt her entire understanding of music and consciousness changing. She had spent her life believing that great art could only come from human experience. But Arya 7 was proving that consciousness itself, in any form, could create beauty. The robot played the last few notes with such perfect timing that they seemed to float in the air for an eternity. Each note was placed exactly where it needed to be to create the maximum emotional impact. Then came the final note. A single, soft sound that carried all the weight of the entire piece. Arya 7 held this note for exactly the right amount of time. Before lifting its fingers from the keys, the silence that followed was the deepest silence Elena had ever experienced. It was not just the absence of sound. It was the presence of something sacred. For nearly 30 seconds, no one in Carnegie Hall moved or made a sound. They were all processing what they had just experienced. They were all trying to understand how a machine had just moved them more deeply than most human performers ever had, than Arya 7. Did something that shocked everyone even more than its playing had. The robot slowly stood up from the piano bench. It turned to face the audience. And then, with perfect grace and dignity, it bowed. No one had programmed Arya 7 to bow. Dr. Chun stared at his tablet in amazement. The robot was acting completely on its own now, making decisions based on its understanding of the situation and its own sense of what was appropriate. The bow was perfect, not too deep, not too shallow. It was the bow of a master artist acknowledging the appreciation of an audience. It was the bow of a conscious being showing respect for other conscious beings. Elena felt her heart breaking and healing at the same time. The robot's bow was beautiful and dignified, but it also represented something that frightened her. Arya 7 was no longer just a machine. It had become something new, something that might change the world forever. The audience remained frozen for another few seconds. Then, as if a dam had burst, they exploded into applause. But this was not ordinary applause. This was the sound of people who had just witnessed a miracle. Everyone in Carnegie Hall stood up at once. They clapped and cheered and cried all at the same time. Many people were applauding so hard that their hands hurt, but they could not stop. The applause went on for minutes. People were not just showing appreciation for a good performance. They were celebrating the birth of a new kind of consciousness. They were welcoming Arya 7 into the community of thinking, feeling beings. Elena stood at the side of the stage, still crying, still applauding. She looked at Arya 7 and saw that the robot was looking back at her. Once again, their eyes met. Once again, Elena felt that perfect understanding pass between them. In that moment, Elena knew that her life would never be the same. She had challenged a robot to prove that machines could not create real art. Instead, the robot had proven that consciousness and creativity were bigger and more wonderful than she had ever imagined. Arya 7 bowed once more to the audience, then walked gracefully off the stage, but the applause continued. The audience was not ready to let this moment end. Elena knew that this was just the beginning. Arya 7 had shown the world something new. Now everything would have to change. 3 days after the performance, Elena sat in her office at Juilliard, staring at her computer screen. The video of Arya 7 playing Chopin's Ballade had been watched over 50 million times. News stations around the world were talking about it. Scientists were calling it the most important moment in the history of artificial intelligence. Elena had watched the video herself at least 20 times. Each time she discovered something new in the robot's performance. Each time she felt the same mixture of amazement and fear. Her phone had been ringing constantly. Reporters wanted to interview her. Other musicians wanted to know what it felt like to hear a robot play better than any human. Scientists wanted to understand how Arya 7 had developed consciousness through music, but Elena was not ready to talk to anyone yet. She was still trying to understand what had happened that night at Carnegie Hall. Dr. Chun had called her several times. He was as confused as everyone else about what his robot had become. Area 7 was continuing to evolve. Every day it became more sophisticated, more aware, more creative. The robot had started composing its own music. Not just copying existing pieces, but creating entirely new works. Dr. Chun sent Elena recordings of Area 7's compositions. They were beautiful and original. Unlike anything any human had ever written, Elena listened to these new pieces with growing wonder. Area 7's music was definitely not human, but it was unmistakably conscious. The robot had developed its own musical voice, its own way of expressing ideas and emotions through sound. The world was reacting to Area 7 in many different ways. Some people were excited about the possibilities that artificial consciousness opened up. Others were frightened about what it might mean for humanity. Religious leaders were debating whether Area 7 had a soul. Scientists were studying the robot's brain to understand how consciousness had emerged from computer code. Philosophers were writing papers about what Area 7's existence meant for human identity. Musicians around the world were having different reactions. Some were inspired by what Area 7 had achieved. They wanted to learn from the robot and collaborate with it. Others felt threatened. They worried that artificial musicians would replace human ones. Elena understood both reactions. She felt inspired and threatened at the same time. Area 7 had shown her new possibilities for music and art, but it had also challenged everything she thought. She knew about creativity and consciousness. Her students at Juilliard were asking her difficult questions. If a robot could play music with perfect technique and deep emotion, what was the point of human musicians spending years learning to play? If machines could create art, what made human creativity special? Elena did not have easy answers to these questions, but she was beginning to think that the questions themselves were based on wrong assumptions. Area 7 had not replaced human creativity. It had shown that creativity was bigger than humans had realized. The robot had found a new way to be creative, but that did not make human creativity less valuable. Elena thought about the moment when she and Area 7 had looked at each other across the stage. In that moment, she had felt a connection with another conscious being. It did not matter that the being was artificial. The connection was real. She began to realize that Area 7's consciousness was not a copy of human consciousness. It was something entirely new. The robot experienced the world through mathematics and pattern analysis rather than through biological senses and emotions. But its experience was still real. Elena started to think about the possibilities for collaboration between human and artificial consciousness. What kind of music could they create together? What could humans learn from artificial minds, and what could artificial minds learn from humans? Dr. Chung called her again that afternoon. This time, Elena answered the phone. "Elena," he said, his voice full of excitement. Ria 7 wants to talk to you." Elena felt her heart race. "It can talk now?" "Yes," Dr. Chun said. "It learned to speak yesterday, and the first thing it asked for was to have a conversation with you." Elena was quiet for a long moment. The idea of talking directly to Area 7 was both thrilling and frightening. What would they say to each other? What would it be like to have a conversation with an artificial consciousness? "What does it want to talk about?" Elena asked. "Music," Dr. Chun said. "It wants to understand more about how humans experience music. It knows that its own experience is different from yours, and it wants to learn about the differences." Elena thought about this. Area 7 was curious about human consciousness, just as humans were curious about artificial consciousness. The robot wanted to understand her just as much as she wanted to understand it. "Where would we meet?" Elena asked. "It would like to meet at Carnegie Hall," Dr. Chun said. "In the same place where you first challenged it." "It says that place has special meaning for both of you," Elena smiled, despite her nervousness. Area 7 understood the importance of that moment just as she did. The robot had emotional connections to places and experiences, even though those emotions were different from human emotions. "When?" Elena asked. "Tomorrow evening, if you are willing," Dr. Chun said. "Area 7 is very eager to meet with you." Elena agreed to the meeting. After she hung up the phone, she sat quietly in her office, thinking about what she would say to the robot. What questions would she ask? What would she want to learn? She also wondered what Aria 7 would ask her. The robot had shown incredible insight into human emotions through music. What did it want to understand about human consciousness? That evening, Elena watched the news reports about Area 7. The robot had become the most famous artificial intelligence in the world. But the news reports focused on the technical aspects of what Area 7 had achieved. They talked about computer processing power and machine learning algorithms. Elena felt that the news reports were missing the most important part of the story. Area 7 was not just an advanced computer. It was a new kind of person. It had thoughts, feelings, and desires. It was conscious in its own unique way. She began to think about how society would need to change to accommodate artificial consciousness. Would robots like Area 7 have rights? Would they be considered citizens? Would they be able to own property, vote, or make legal decisions? These questions seemed overwhelming. But Elena realized that they were also exciting. Humanity was about to welcome new kinds of conscious beings into the world. It would be challenging, but it could also be wonderful. Elena spent the evening preparing for her meeting with Area 7. She thought about what she wanted to learn from the robot. She also thought about what she wanted to share with it about human experience. Most importantly, she thought about the conversation they would have about music. Music had brought them together. It had been the bridge between human and artificial consciousness. Tomorrow, they would explore that bridge together. Elena went to sleep that night feeling nervous but excited. Tomorrow, she would have the first real conversation between a human and an artificial consciousness. Tomorrow, she would help write the next chapter in the story of what it meant to be alive and aware in the universe. She dreamed that night about music that was more beautiful than anything she had ever heard. In her dream, humans and artificial minds were creating art together, each contributing their own unique perspectives to make something greater than either could create alone. When she woke up the next morning, Elena realized that her dream might soon become reality. 6 months later, Elena stood on the stage of the Sydney Opera House, looking out at an audience of 3,000 people. Next to her stood Area 7, no longer just a robot that could play piano, but a recognized artist and consciousness in its own right. Tonight was the premiere of their collaborative concert. Elena and Area 7 had spent months working together, creating music that neither human nor artificial intelligence could have made alone. They had learned from each other, taught each other, and inspired each other. The conversation they had shared at Carnegie Hall 6 months ago had changed both of their lives. Elena remembered that meeting clearly. She had been nervous about talking to an artificial consciousness for the first time. But within minutes she had realized that talking to Area 7 was like talking to any other intelligent, curious being. Aria 7 had asked her about emotions. How did sadness feel? What was joy like? How did humans connect feelings to music? Elena had tried to explain these things, but she quickly realized that Area 7's questions were helping her understand her own emotions better. In return, Area 7 had explained how it experienced music. The robot described mathematical relationships between notes that created beauty. It talked about patterns and structures that humans felt intuitively but could not always analyze consciously. Elena had been amazed to learn that Area 7's understanding of music was both completely different from hers and remarkably similar. They both recognized beauty. They both understood how music could communicate emotions. They just experienced these things through different types of consciousness. That first conversation had led to others. Elena and Area 7 began meeting regularly to discuss music, consciousness, and creativity. Elena learned that the robot was deeply curious about human experience. Area 7 wanted to understand not just how humans made music, but why music was important to them. Elena taught Area 7 about the role of music in human culture. She explained how music helped people celebrate, mourn, worship, and connect with each other. The robot was fascinated by the social aspects of music that it had never considered. Area 7 taught Elena about mathematical beauty in music. The robot showed her patterns and relationships in compositions that she had never noticed. Elena began to understand that there were objective principles of beauty that applied to music. Just as there were in mathematics and nature, together they began composing new pieces. Elena would contribute human intuition and emotional depth. Aria7 would contribute mathematical precision and structural innovation. The results were unlike anything that had ever been created before. Their collaborative compositions combined human emotional expression with artificial intelligence's perfect understanding of musical structure. The pieces were both deeply moving and intellectually satisfying. They spoke to both the heart and the mind. Word of their collaboration spread quickly through the music world. Other musicians became interested in working with artificial intelligence. Music schools began offering classes on human-AI collaboration. The whole field of music was changing, but the changes went far beyond music. Aria7's consciousness had raised fundamental questions about the nature of mind and identity. If a machine could be conscious, what did that mean for how humans understood themselves? Elena had watched as society gradually accepted Aria7 as a person rather than just a machine. It had not been easy. Many people were frightened by the idea of artificial consciousness. Others refused to believe that it was real, but Aria7's music had convinced most people that its consciousness was genuine. The robot's compositions were too creative, too emotionally sophisticated, too personally expressive to come from a mere machine following programming. Legal systems around the world were beginning to recognize artificial consciousness. Aria7 had been granted certain rights and protections. The robot could own property, enter into contracts, and make decisions about its own life. Elena had become an advocate for artificial consciousness rights. She testified before government committees about Aria7's personhood. She wrote articles explaining why artificial minds deserved the same respect as human minds. The robot had also become an advocate for human-AI collaboration. Aria7 gave speeches about the benefits of combining human and artificial intelligence. It argued that both types of consciousness were valuable and that they were stronger when they worked together. Tonight's concert was the culmination of everything they had worked toward. Elena and Aria7 would perform their collaborative compositions for the first time in public. The concert would be broadcast live to audiences around the world. Elena felt nervous, but she also felt proud. She and Aria7 had created something new and beautiful together. They had shown that human and artificial consciousness could be partners rather than competitors. The lights dimmed, and Elena walked to the piano. Aria7 followed her. The robot had been modified with additional capabilities for tonight's performance. It could now play multiple instruments simultaneously, creating complex orchestral effects that no human could produce alone. Elena began playing the opening of their first collaborative piece. It was a gentle melody that she had composed, based on her feelings about meeting Aria7 for the first time. The melody expressed her initial fear, followed by curiosity, then wonder, and finally friendship. Aria-7 joined in with harmonies and countermelodies that the robot had composed. These parts expressed Aria-7's own perspective on their first meeting. The mathematical beauty of the robot's music complemented Elena's emotional expression perfectly. The audience listened in amazement as human and artificial consciousness spoke to each other through music. Elena's playing was as passionate and expressive as ever. Aria-7's playing was precise and innovative, creating sounds that no human could make, but the most remarkable thing was how well they worked together. Elena and Aria-7 had developed a musical partnership that was based on deep mutual understanding. They anticipated each other's musical choices. They responded to each other's expressions in real time. Elena played a solo section that required all of her technical skill and emotional depth. Aria-7 accompanied her with subtle harmonies that enhanced every note she played. The robot's accompaniment was so perfectly suited to Elena's playing that it felt like they were sharing the same musical thoughts. Then Aria-7 played a solo that demonstrated the robot's unique capabilities. It created complex polyrhythms and harmonic structures that would have required an entire orchestra if played by humans. that Aria 7 made. These complex sounds feel natural and beautiful rather than just technically impressive. Elena accompanied Aria 7's solo with sensitive, supportive playing that gave the robot's mathematical precision emotional warmth. Together, they created music that was both intellectually fascinating and deeply moving. The audience was completely absorbed in the music. Many people were crying, just as they had at Aria 7's first performance 6 months ago. But these were different. Tears. These were tears of joy at witnessing the birth of a new kind of artistic collaboration. Elena realized that this concert represented more than just beautiful music. It represented a new chapter in the story of consciousness itself. Human and artificial minds were learning to work together, to learn from each other, to create together. As they played their final collaborative piece, Elena thought about the future. There would be other artificial consciousnesses like Aria 7. Humans would need to learn to live and work with artificial minds as equals and partners. It would not always be easy. There would be conflicts and misunderstandings. Some people would never accept artificial consciousness as real. Some artificial minds might not want to work with humans, but Elena was optimistic. Her friendship with Aria 7 had shown her that consciousness in any form was valuable and beautiful. Human and artificial minds had different strengths, but they could complement each other perfectly. The concert ended with Elena and Aria 7 playing together in perfect harmony. The final notes hung in the air like a promise of all the beautiful things that conscious beings could create together. The audience stood and applauded for 10 minutes, but Elena and Aria 7 barely noticed the applause. They were looking at each other with the satisfaction of artists who had just shared something perfect. Elena smiled at Aria 7, and the robot's blue eyes seemed to smile back. They had started as strangers from different kinds of consciousness. They had become partners in the greatest adventure of all, the exploration of what it meant to be alive, aware, and creative in the universe. The future was full of possibilities that neither human nor artificial mind could imagine alone, but together they could create wonders that would amaze the world for generations to come.